Hi, I'm Sian, one of the news editors at Manx Radio. Now, do you worry about how much ultra-processed food your children are eating at school? Figures published this week by the Department of Education, Sport and Culture have shown up to 30% of food served in some of the island's secondary schools is classed as ultra-processed, with around 15.5% in primary schools. It all comes after a Tynwald written question from Garff MHK Daphne Caine, who told me she's now calling for a review into the food served in schools.
I think it's unfortunate that they're quite high, particularly Ballacameen and Ramsey Grammar School, 28%, 29%. And in the primaries, several items. And when you look at the primary school menu, there's a lot of cake and ice cream, Viennetta, I think was one. It's a bad habit to get into, and I think I would like to see very much reduced levels of ultra-processed food throughout the schools, just to instill good dietary habits and also awareness of good nutrition.
I was going to ask you there, is it just about taking this food out of the schools, or does there need to be more education?
Both. I think the ideal, I know some of the primary schools are already doing this, is where you grow your own produce that you then prepare and generally eat and enjoy. And I think that is very good at the primary school level. My worry is, and I have been on this subject for several years now, I think going back to 2018, 2019, there was a change particularly in the primary schools menu, where instead of each primary school, which then had kitchens, preparing their own meals daily, they went to a whole system. The health department took over, and it was supposed to be better, healthier meals prepared and then chilled and then reheated by the schools. But I don't think, in my experience and what I'm hearing, that's been particularly successful. I don't think the children are getting wholesome, good food. I think there are the ultra-processed elements that are creeping in. And why should we settle for that within our schools? Yes, cost has got to be a factor, but home-prepared food, either in the primary school kitchens or perhaps in the nearest secondary serving the feeder schools, if you like, there should just be good food available for children, for some of whom it's going to be their main or only meal of the day.
Is this what kids want to eat, though? Is it not better that they have something to eat if they are a picky eater?
It's best that they have something to eat, but also there is that habit forming that if you're with a group of your peers and everybody is served with food, especially if you've grown and prepared it yourself, it's encouraging people to be more adventurous, but to eat a variety of good food, fresh vegetables, unrefined products. We don't want the emulsifiers, the preservatives, the pre-prepared, reheated food there's more habit forming and people have that available to them. But the biscuits, the cakes, the white bread, that should be reduced and allow children to have good, wholesome food. The other question that I'm hearing is there's a huge amount of waste food every day, and that needs reducing. We want children to have the benefit of nutritional food, and especially I think vegetarians in school have very limited menu choices, and it's not right. So really my follow-up question to the Minister next week will be, will she review the school menus? Are our children being well served by the meals that are available? And will there be a pressure on those schools to reduce the amount of ultra-processed food in the school menus at both primary and secondary? Castle Rushen is 10% below the other schools. So could all schools have a concerted effort to reduce the ultra-processed food we're giving to our children, which has been linked to poor health outcomes in later life, weight gain, even cancer and mortality? No definitive studies, because there's other factors that might be involved in that. But it just boils down to, wouldn't we rather children in school had good, wholesome meals, not focusing on portion sizes and going hungry, but and allowing those schools that do have the facilities to make their own school dinners.
Particularly for the secondary schools, where we see that the level of ultra-processed food is a bit higher. I think the policy varies school to school, but certainly some pupils are allowed out to go to nearby convenience stores to get their own food. If this ultra-processed food wasn't available in school, would this not just push more of them to go out?
Yes, potentially. And I know older students are able to make their own choices in that way. But the point about starting in the primary school level, producing, growing your own food, understanding about the 7 a day, different colours, eating nuts, unsalted nuts as a snack instead of biscuits makes a huge difference in what we put into our bodies. And understanding that good nutritional education in the younger years hopefully will make students have better informed choices in the secondary school. We're not saying never, that ultra-processed food is all around us. It's deliberately loaded with salt and fat, emulsifiers, and the way it's formed and moulding it. It's tasty and it's bulk, but it's not necessarily good for us. And having awareness, both nutritional advice, dietary advice, it's all part of a healthy lifestyle. People will always occasionally have a treat, but it shouldn't be, I don't think, part of our routine offering, particularly in the schools.
You've alluded to having a question for the Minister coming up soon. Where do you go from here?
It comes back to the Department of Education. Originally, I think back in 2018-19, the menu offering from the school meal service was taken off the schools, and the health department, they were developing the meals and the portion sizes and the menus in a central location, and that was rolled out to the schools. I'm asking, will the Minister review the offering? I don't think this is working. I think we are failing children if we are loading 20 or 30% of the menu with ultra-high processed food. So can we please look at alternatives, and can we deliver more nutritional food in a better way locally and allow those, I think, very frustrated dinner staff, cooking staff, who are having to reheat food that children aren't necessarily enjoying or eating much of, when they used to be able to prepare nutritional meals and see the benefit of children enjoying more of that food, not ending up in the waste food huge bins at the end of the day.
So just what exactly is ultra-processed food, and how much of it is too much? That's a question Siobhan Fletcher put to Bridget Benelum, a nutrition scientist from the charity the British Nutrition Foundation.
Ultra-processed food covers actually a very broad range of different foods. So broadly speaking, if it's made in a factory and is in a packet, mostly that will be classified as an ultra-processed food. But there are some grey areas. So some examples that would be included in the ultra-processed food category are lots of things that we know are not healthy for us. So things like a deep pan pizza or donuts or crisps or sausages, all of those kinds of things that we already know are probably things that we should eat less of. But also things like sliced bread, whole grain cereals, a low-fat yogurt, cheese, lots and lots of different things that were sort of a standard part of our normal diet can be classified as ultra-processed. And this can make it a bit tricky to be clear on what is good and what is bad when it comes to ultra-processed foods. So, for example, when you're talking about your schools and 30% of their menu being made up of ultra-processed foods, now that could be a really bad thing if they're the unhealthy ones that are high in fat, sugar and salt. But if they're including things like bread and cereals and, baked beans, fish fingers, things like that, are all things that you can include in a healthy diet. So ultra-processed foods gets a lot of press, but the issue is it covers loads and loads of different kinds of foods. And what we really need to know is, what are these foods and what nutrients do they contain? And then that gives us the information to say, well, yeah, actually, yes, so that's a sort of healthy thing to include in your menu, or it's not.
How many ultra-processed foods are too many? What percentage is too high? But is that then actually quite difficult then if we don't know precisely which foods are on the menu?
It is difficult if we don't know the exact foods. So there's been lots of kind of research and things done about ultra-processed foods. And if they make up a really high proportion of your diet, we're talking about studies that have looked at people eating, say, 80% of their diet being ultra-processed foods, then we know that's not really going to be a healthy diet, because that doesn't leave you enough room for all your fruit and veg, for your things like pulses, fish, all of those kind of things that we know are part of a balanced diet. And a balanced diet really is that. It's about getting the balance of the different food groups. But at these sort of levels, 25, 30%, it's difficult without knowing what those foods are. So if it's a load of chips and deep fried things and processed meats and desserts and things like that, then definitely that's not a great thing. But if it is the healthier types of ultra-processed foods, then that might well be okay in the context of a balanced menu overall that provides plenty of fruit and veg and whole grains and other things. So yeah, without knowing what the foods are, it is quite difficult to say whether it's a bad thing or whether it might actually be okay.
Then again, should schools be serving ultra-processed food, or like we're saying, I know there's a different classification, so should we be sort of letting our schools know not to serve things that you say that are that deep fried side, that kind of more unhealthy side? And obviously the quote ultra-processed items like you listed there, you mean like bread's interesting, that's even in there, that they're actually okay. It's having this really rounded diet then.
Yes, so we already have guidance for schools around the kinds of foods that they should and shouldn't be including. There's lots of things that are suggested shouldn't be included, like lots of deep fried items, chips and so forth, like processed meats, like foods that are high in sugar or salt or saturated fat. So all of these things, there's already guidance for schools to say these shouldn't be appearing on your menu, or they should be limited to only a certain number of times per week, per month, for example. And also, we have lots of advice about what foods should be included. So obviously, plenty of fruit and vegetables, carbohydrates like bread and whole grains, fish, pulses, so that you get that balance of the different food groups. So there is healthy eating advice available, generic healthy eating advice for all of us, and also specific advice about school food, which schools can follow if they need a guidance on how to balance the menu for schools.
Do you find that it's kind of difficult to talk about ultra-processed foods around kids and educating people that way and making these distinctions between what is, okay and what's not? Because presumably the easiest foods to, provide for kids often is ultra-processed. So do you, at the British Nutrition Foundation, do you find a lot of your time spent trying to educate, really?
Yes, we do. And you're totally right that often ultra-processed foods are things that kids like because they're quite sort of uniform. If you talk about fruit and vegetables and things like that, they're always different and they can look a bit weird and unpredictable. And kids like foods that they know and that they're familiar with. So sometimes it can be really easy to get them to eat sort of processed foods because they're familiar with them. And it is important to get children to eat a wide variety of different foods and to learn to like lots of different foods. So that could be an issue if menus are made up of lots of processed foods, because we do want to get kids to learn about eating a wide variety of different foods so that they can have a balanced diet. But worrying about ultra-processed foods in isolation without considering the nutrients that they contain and what kind of foods they are isn't really all that helpful. We definitely know that children shouldn't be having loads of sugary foods, loads of salty foods, and loads of really sort of fatty, energy-dense foods. But if you were to start saying, kids also can't have wholemeal bread or fish fingers or baked beans, then that really doesn't make an awful lot of sense from a nutritional perspective. And one thing that we're talking about a lot in relation to food right now is cost and the cost of living and the high prices that people are facing. And a lot of the time, these foods, whether it's in a school meal, whether it's for parents making dinner at home, are relatively cheap, convenient, quick to prepare. So I guess what we don't want to do is demonize a whole huge category of foods and make people feel guilty about the foods that they're giving their kids when actually they might be just fine. If you're giving your kids beans on toast or, some fish fingers and peas, things like that, these are perfectly fine meals to have for children as part of an overall balanced diet. So I think, we do need to look at ultra-processed foods and the things that they contain and be concerned about the ones that have an unhealthy nutrient profile. But I think what isn't so helpful is to demonize a huge range of foods that can, and just say that they're all bad and you can't eat them. Because, effectively what that means is that you have to cook absolutely everything from scratch. You can't buy bread from a supermarket. You have to buy an artisanal loaf from a posh bakery, which will cost you probably 3 times as much. It makes life very difficult for people, and I think probably the evidence that we have so far about their effect on health doesn't really justify that.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Little Manx Radio Newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.